So we're very pleased to have you, Bert. Thanks for kicking off this renewed uh, energy in this series on the history of aesthetics for us. So the format will be Federico kindly offered to moderate, so I'm going to turn it over to him, and then we'll open up to the Q&A, and we'll conclude after about 90 minutes or so. So I just also want to thank the Society for German Idealism and Romanticism for partnering here with the publicity, and I really appreciate that have everyone sort of coming together with all this excitement about aesthetics. So I'll turn it over to you, Federico.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert.
Sorry, can I just say
I'm
one last thing? I forgot to introduce you. So Federico Rampinini is affiliated with the University of Ferrara and works on Kant on music, and has recently published an article with the British Journal of Aesthetics on Kant and music. So forgive me for overlooking that. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's with great pleasure and honor that I am going to give the floor to Robert Louden, Professor Robert Louden, who is distinguished professor at the University of Southern Maine and one of the leading contemporary scholars on Kant. His work has been especially influential in the study of Kant's anthropology, moral philosophy, and the relation to the broader critical project. He's the editor of several volumes of the Cambridge edition of the works of Immanuel Kant, including Anthropology, History, and Education, and the lectures on anthropology. His book, Kant's Theoretics, as Robert Clewis already mentioned, is widely regarded as a landmark in Kant studies. And more recently, he published Johann Bernhard Basedow and the Transformation of Modern Education, the first English intellectual biography on this influential Enlightenment figure. So today, he will present a lecture entitled Facing the Music, Kant and the Art of the Tone. And Professor Loudon, thank you very much for being with us today. And we are very delighted to have you, and I'm very happy and honored to give you the floor. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, so well, thanks for setting this up. This is a newish area of Kant studies for me. The piece is called Facing the Music, Kant and the Art of Tone. Part one, Experience Matters, sometimes. Kant is one of a select few philosophers, Aristotle and Bertrand Russell also come to mind, who earnestly discussed topics and issues ranging far beyond philosophy's traditional turf. Earthquakes? Check. Psychosomatics? Check. Fortification and pyrotechnics? Check. Music? Of course. But while some of us may admire the tremendous breadth of Kant's work, several of its outer edges would seem to face a version of the following criticism. Non-philosophers often criticize armchair philosophers' work for its lack of engagement with empirical research and practical experience. The results of such work, it is often claimed, are inevitably weak and frivolous, for they lack a grounding in the real world. While this well-known criticism would not seem to gain much traction in traditional philosophical writing, in fields such as logic and metaphysics, which, on most accounts, are non-empirical by nature, it does, or so I will argue, carry some weight when it comes to topics such as earthquakes, psychosomatics, fortification, pyrotechnics, and, my focus in what follows, music. While a philosopher writing on such topics will inevitably be more concerned with conceptual issues that are not resolvable by appeals to empirical data, then will a non-philosopher writing on the same topics, some familiarity with and interest in the empirical details of the topic, whether gained firsthand by personal experience or, as is more common with armchair theorists, through reading, research, and reflection on the experiences of others, is necessary. At the same time, however, the case for practical experience that I will try to make in what follows should not be overstated. Accomplished practitioners of an art or craft will not necessarily be able to produce a good theory of their art or craft. This was Socrates' point in Plato's Apology when he recounted his efforts to make sense of the oracle's proclamation that no one was wiser than Socrates, while Socrates himself believed that he was not wise at all. So Socrates states, I must give you an account of my journeyings as if they were labors I had undertaken to prove the oracle irrefutable. After the politicians, I went to the poets. I took up those poems with which they seemed to have taken the most trouble and asked them what they meant, in order that I might at the same time learn something from them. I am ashamed to tell you the truth, gentlemen, but I must. Almost all the bystanders might have explained the poems better than their authors could. I soon realized that poets do not compose their poems with knowledge, but by some inborn talent and inspiration, like seers and prophets, who also say many fine things without any understanding of what they say. Experience, familiarity, and intellectual engagement with a topic are sometimes necessary to produce a good theory about the topic, but they are far from sufficient. In addition, one needs to be a good theorist. In what follows, I will present a simple, but I believe important, critique of Kant's views on music. At bottom, the critique rests on the following argument. Kant does not offer readers a viable theory of music, in large part because he lacks sufficient familiarity with and interest in music. Extensive familiarity with and interest in music are necessary in order to produce a feasible theory of music. Part 2, music as culture. At present, most philosophical accounts of music still hover around one or another version of the long-established alternatives of formalism and expressionism. According to the formalists, the meaning of a musical work is primarily intellectual and rests in its form, the way it is composed, the relations between the tones, the harmonies and rhythms employed, and so forth. As Kivy states, music is pure sound structure. Thus, Edvard Hanslick, perhaps the most influential defender of musical formalism, defines the beauty of a musical composition as a beauty that is self-contained and in no need of a content from outside of itself, one that consists simply and solely of tones and their artistic combination. It's also worth noting that Hanslick himself viewed Kant as one of the eminent people, mostly philosophers, who have affirmed the contentlessness of music. So in other words, Hanslick, like other, but by no means all commentators, regards Kant as a formalist. Expressionism, on the other hand, puts more weight on emotion, holding that it is music's ability to express emotions and or to arouse emotions in the listener that gives it enduring value. Schopenhauer, for instance, in The World as Will and Representation, claims that music is a copy of the will itself. Similarly, Nietzsche, in his early work, The Birth of Tragedy, follows Schopenhauer when he proclaims, "We understand music as the immediate language of the will." In this section, I wish to offer a short plea for a different way of looking at music, one that, while certainly having its defenders in philosophy, is more at home in fields such as cultural theory and sociology. Whatever else one may wish to say about music, it is fundamentally a cultural phenomenon. As Wayne Bowman observes, music is never a pure, self-contained thing, however convenient and reassuring that may be to believe. It is cultural, and culture is constantly being created, recreated, modified, contested, and negotiated. As well, music's socio-cultural facts pose significant challenges to ideas like musical autonomy and the existence of culturally invariant musical universals. As sociocultural constructions, musical values and functions are not absolute, but relative, culturally specific, and as fluid, various, diverse, and unstable as culture itself. From the perspective of the views it undermines, these may sound like negative claims, but for those who advance the social view of music, they are vivifying ideas, convictions that promise to confer upon music renewed senses of potency and force, of relevance and import wrongly taken from music by the misguided doctrine of musical autonomy. Music, of course, involves patterns of sound and rhythm, and it often does express and/or arouse emotions. But every piece of music is created by someone at a particular time who lives in a particular place. And the resulting character of the musical work depends, at least in part, on the specific time and place at which and in which it was created. As Adorno puts it, music is never purely natural material, but rather a social and historical product. Regardless of what kind of music one seeks to understand, pop, classical, Western, Eastern, medieval, contemporary, and so forth, every musical work is connected to a cultural tradition. However, as Bowman stresses in the earlier quotation, culture is constantly being recreated, modified, contested, and negotiated. Some musical works seek to recreate or continue a cultural tradition, some to modify or alter it, some to criticize or contest it, and so forth. Indeed, some musical works aim to transform culture and announce the arrival of something new. As Attali, an Italian philosopher, writes, music heralds, for it is prophetic. It is a herald, for change is inscribed in noise faster than it transforms society. Music is prophecy. It makes audible the new world that will gradually become visible. At the same time, however, there are obvious limitations to the music as culture position when it is viewed as capturing the essence of music. Music is not just culture. Any theoretical account of music that stresses only its cultural dimension is severely lacking. And music is hardly alone in being cultural by nature. Many human activities, in addition to music, also involve a strong cultural component, including philosophy. Culture is not unique to music. In the tired language of necessary and sufficient conditions, culture is a necessary but not sufficient condition for the existence of a musical work. But it is also one that many philosophers have failed to appreciate. Okay, and now getting closer to Kant. Part 3, does Kant have a theory of music? Despite the fairly extensive and growing body of secondary literature on Kant's philosophy of music, at present, there is still no consensus as to what his basic position on the nature of music is. And some commentators have even concluded that Kant does not have a theory of music. This lack of consensus, I contend, is itself partly a reflection of the more fundamental point that I am trying to establish. And that is, again, that Kant lacks a viable theory of music due in large part to his lack of familiarity with and serious interest in the culture of music. According to what James Young calls the orthodox view, Kant is the progenitor of formalism in the philosophy of music. Karl Dahlhaus, for instance, a German writer, writes in his Aesthetic of Music that it is an opinion commonly accepted among academics that Kant founded formalism in music. And Dahlhaus himself endorses this commonly accepted opinion on the next page of his book when he states that Kant defines musical beauty formally as a harmony of representations of tone. Meanwhile, other commentators speak confidently of Kant's expressive theory of music and hold that his views on music could scarcely be further from formalism. Small wonder, then, that other commentators have concluded that Kant's analysis of music is clearly inadequate, and that the Kantian conception of music has limited intrinsic importance, while still others deny that Kant has anything coherent to say about music. It is not my intent here to engage in a detailed analysis of Kant's remarks about music. There are enough examples of this already in the existing secondary literature. Rather, my aim is simply to show that there are prominent passages in Kant's third critique that seem to support formalism, while others appear to support expressionism. Defenders of the formalist reading often point to Kant's discussion of free beauty early in the first part of the third critique, where Kant asserts that all examples of music without a text, so this would be all types of instrumental or absolute music, on which most philosophers of music tend to focus, signify nothing by themselves. They do not represent anything, no object under a determinate concept, and are free beauties. And free beauties, unlike what Kant calls adherent or conditional beauties, are always judged, he claims, according to mere form. Here, Kant claims that instrumental music should properly be judged by its form alone. Its beauty is self-contained and does not point to anything outside of itself. On the other hand, later in the third critique, Kant describes music as a language of the affects. And in an attempt to support his claim that music occupies the lowest place among the beautiful arts, as a language that merely plays with sensations. So here he is clearly asserting that the essence of music, and is he talking about all music at this point, vocal as well as instrumental, lies in the expression and or the arousal of emotions. So, is Kant a formalist or an expressionist? Take your pick. As is probably evident by now, I agree with the more skeptically inclined commentators cited earlier in this section. I don't think Kant has a theory of music. I don't think his statements about music are consistent. And I don't think his discussion of music is as important or valuable as many other readers do. However, my reasons for this skepticism are somewhat different from most of the other skeptically inclined commentators. For instance, while I agree in part with Thorndike's claim that Kant does not have a theory of music because he is interested in the conditions of the possibility of aesthetic experience as a transcendental philosopher, I think the main reason why Kant does not have a theory of music and does not have important things to say about it is simply that he lacks sufficient experience and interest in the culture of music. I shall try to demonstrate this in the next section when I examine the evidence regarding Kant's own experience of and interest in music. Okay, fourth part, Kant's experience of music. By almost all accounts, Kant's interest in and familiarity with music was slim. As Parrott aptly remarks at the beginning of his article, within the immense Kantian cathedral, one can find a rarely visited little chapel. Music, it is clear, was not the primary interest of the philosopher from Königsberg. Everything he says about it is marginal compared to the central theses of his oeuvre. It is situated at the edge of his concerns. Testimony from Kant's earliest biographers and friends, as well as some of his own remarks, confirm this assessment. Let us start by looking at the testimony of his biographers and friends. Jachmann, in the 10th letter of his 1804 biography, writes that of all the arts, Kant had the least sense for music, even though he occasionally attended concerts of great masters. He himself did not play an instrument, nor did he advise anyone dedicated to the sciences to play music, because it would easily keep one away from scientific pursuits. He also denied music any ability to express intellectual concepts in which something could be thought. Rather, it was just an expression of sensual feelings in which one could only feel and would have to think one's thoughts alongside it. As a result, he also had more taste for music when it was connected to poetry. Borowski, also one of Kant's earliest biographers, writes similarly that Kant considered music to be innocent sensuality, unschuldige Sinnenlust. In my 16th year, he admonished me and several other of his students at the time not to indulge in music, since this would require much time to learn and even more to practice it in order to achieve any skill, always to the detriment of the more serious sciences. There was no art to be found anywhere in his house, other than in his living room, where one found on the wall an engraving of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. In earlier years, he liked to attend plays. Later, not at all. And Waziansky, another early biographer who also served as cantor for 6 years at the Trogheim Church in Königsberg, and thus did possess considerable interest, experience, and skill in music, writes, this summer, that would be 1803, shortly before Kant's death, the music of the parade guards granted Kant a more than usual momentary entertainment. When it passed by his house, he opened the middle door of the back room where he lived and listened to it with attentiveness and enjoyment. One might have thought that the deep metaphysician would have only derived pleasure from music expressing pure harmony, resolute modulations, and naturally resolved dissonances, or from the products of serious tone artists such as Haydn. But this was not the case, as the following facts prove. In 1795, he visited me with the now deceased Privy Councillor von Hippel to hear my bowed piano, Bogenflügel, an adagio with a flageolet, which has a tone similar to a harmonica. Yeah, this is a kind of a tiny flute that I don't think is used anymore. It seemed more disgusting than trivial to him, but the bowed piano pleased him immensely when played at full strength with the lid open, especially when imitating a symphony with a full orchestra. Only with distaste could he recall the funeral music he had once heard in honor of Moses Mendelssohn, which, as he put it, had consisted of an eternal, tiresome whimpering. He commented that other feelings should have been expressed, such as, for example, victory over death, hence heroic music, or a sense of completion. That is why he was already on the point of making his escape, and after this cantata, he attended no more concerts in order to avoid being tormented by similar unpleasant feelings. He preferred intoxicating war music, rauschende Kriegsmusik, to any other kind. Particularly relevant testimony concerning Kant's experience of music comes from German composer and author Johann Friedrich Reichardt. Born in Königsberg, Reichardt entered the University of Königsberg at age 15 and attended Kant's lectures, keeping in touch with him even after becoming Friedrich the Great's Kapellmeister in Berlin. A violinist and pianist, known particularly for his vocal music, Reichardt's instrumental compositions include 7 symphonies, 14 piano concertos, 2 piano quartets, 6-string trios, a violin concerto, 11 violin sonatas, and 12 piano sonatas. In addition to editing several music periodicals, he also wrote a number of books, including Von der Methodenlehre des Geschmacks im musikalischen Kunstmagazin, on the methodology of taste in musical art, über die deutsche komische Oper, on German comical opera, über die Pflichten des Rippenviolinisten, on the duties of the ensemble violinist. That's the one I would like to read. And Schreiben über die Berlinische Musik, writings on Berlin music. Yeah, I had never heard of Reichardt before I started working on this project over the summer. He was, definitely accomplished composer and author, but he is not well known today. Anyway, in a perceptive recollection of Kant's experience of music, Reichardt writes, Kant had never practiced any of the fine arts and did not especially like them. And however much one may loudly declare oneself for the fine arts, if one does not practice them, one cannot penetrate their inner being. They are and remain just an amusing plaything for a short while. A vivid feeling, an extremely fine purity, and warm imagination may perhaps make particular excellent people into lifelong and true enthusiasts of art, even if they do not practice them. But Kant did not possess these qualities. It was rather as if he were all pure reason and deep intellect. Yeah, I don't know if you can see this. Here's the title page of one of his editions of his violin sonatas. Originally, I was tempted to try to play these for you, but I'm sparing you that experience. Anyway, a little more on Reichardt. However, one should by no means infer from this passage that Reichardt's overall assessment of Kant was negative. Quite the contrary. For instance, he begins his August 28, 1790 letter to Kant as follows. The great obligation I have had towards you grows beyond expression with each new publication of yours. Your wise and kind advice alone helped me on my way to literary education, to Bildung, which soon allowed me to see my art from a higher perspective. Also, in the passage written in 1812 that I cited a minute ago, Reichardt defends a much stronger version of the thesis I am defending in the present paper. My claim is merely that one needs some experience and interest in the culture of music in order to produce a viable theory of it. Reichardt's more radical position, which in my view lacks support, and which is also the antithesis of Socrates' earlier cited conviction that accomplished artists are seldom able to offer a viable theory of their practice, is that one needs to practice music in order to penetrate its inner being. But Reichardt's remark that Kant did not especially like music is directly relevant to my thesis. And it also echoes statements made by Kant's earliest biographers that he lacked serious concern for music. That is, that his own preferences in music tended toward the banal and sentimental, that he believed music lacked serious intellectual content, and so forth. German author Karl Vorländer, in his 1924 biography, Immanuel Kant, Der Mann und das Werk, includes a 5-page discussion of Kant and music that also adds a few important details to the portrait sketched thus far. Vorländer begins by noting that Kant did not appear to have a close inner relation to music, while emphasizing that residents of Königsberg frequently had the opportunity to hear good music, including a performance of Mozart's Magic Flute in the summer of 1798, which Kant did not attend. Kant, Forlander adds, seems to have only attended concerts frequently in his younger years. We can infer from these remarks that opportunities to experience new and intellectually challenging music were readily available in 18th century Königsberg, but that Kant himself chose not to take advantage of them. Let us now turn to Kant's own writings and lectures. What does he himself say about his experience of music? As Kivy notes, when Kant discusses music, even in his later writings, he still conceived of its institutional setting as the dining room rather than the concert hall. Music still remained for Kant merely what the Baroque called Tafelmusik. Yeah, literally table music, but more maybe in American, something like elevator music or music as entertainment, thus not worthy of a person's full undivided attention. And this, Kivy adds, in 1790, the year Kant's third critique was published, while audiences in Vienna, Mannheim, Prague, Paris, and London were sitting in rapt attention at performances of the mature instrumental works of Haydn and Mozart, with Beethoven on the verge of making his stormy entrance on the Viennese musical scene. For instance, in his Anthropology, Kant lists music, along with dance and games, as an activity that helps contribute to a speechless social gathering, but which hardly promises to promote true humanity. Similarly, in the Friedlander Anthropology transcription, he includes music, along with comedies, dance, cards, and gambling, as one of the activities that can add enjoyment to social gatherings. But Tafelmusik, Kant adds, always betrays an individual with crude sensations, groben Empfindungen. For with Tafelmusik, all entertaining and animating delights cease. As a result, if one is hosting a gathering with the goal of promoting serious discussion and reflection, then such music is out of place. As he states in the Anthropology, Tafelmusik at a festive banquet is the most tasteless absurdity that revelry has ever contrived. The reason for this is that music, or rather the particular kind of music that Kant enjoyed and was familiar with, does not leave something behind for reflection and is more enjoyment than culture. Consequently, this is a quote now from the third critique, if one estimates the value of the beautiful arts in terms of the culture that they provide for the mind, and takes as one's standard the enlargement of the faculties that one must join together in the power of judgment for the sake of cognition, then to that extent music occupies the lowest place among the beautiful arts, just as it occupies perhaps the highest place among those that are estimated according to their agreeableness, because it merely plays with sensations. Music lacks cognitive content, as he states in the Menschenkunde Anthropology transcription. It cannot awaken ideas. And its seductive charm and agreeableness, qualities which in Kant's view music possesses to a higher degree than other arts, as Susan Schell has written recently, threaten to undermine the ends of reason. However, I submit that all of these remarks are more indicative of the specific kind of music Kant experienced and enjoyed, rather than of music itself. Again, Tafelmusik, or what we might call elevator music. Imagine, for instance, the ideas that might have been awakened if Kant's dinner guests had been treated to a recital featuring a late Haydn or Mozart string quartet before sitting down to eat. Another curious facet of Kant's negative appraisal of music is revealed in his remark that, this is another longish quote from the Third Critique, and you're maybe already familiar with this, there is a certain lack of urbanity in music, in that primarily because of its instruments, it extends its influence further into the neighborhood than is required, and so, as it were, imposes itself, thus interfering with the freedom of others outside of the musical circle, which the arts that speak to the eyes do not do, since one only needs to turn one's eyes away if one would not admit their impression. I mean, if you're disgusted by a painting, you don't have to keep looking at it, just keep on walking. It is almost the same here as in the case of the delight from a widely pervasive smell. Someone who pulls his perfumed handkerchief out of his pocket treats everyone in the vicinity to it against their will and forces them, if they wish to breathe, to enjoy it at the same time. Hence, it has also gone out of fashion. Noise pollution was a serious concern of Kant's. And in our age of electronic amplification, the problem has gotten much worse. For instance, Kant's home in Königsberg was located near the local prison, and he once wrote a letter to his friend Hippel, who at the time was also police superintendent of the city, to complain about the stentorian singing of prayers by hypocritical inmates of the jail. Surely their spiritual rehabilitation would not be in jeopardy, Kant pointed out, if they were required to modulate their singing so that they could hear themselves even with windows shut and without yelling with all their might. Needless to say, Kant does not uniformly criticize music as a form of obtrusive noise pollution that violates people's freedom by imposing itself on them against their wills. Sometimes, as Paul Geyer has pointed out, Kant praises music rather than criticizing it because it spreads its pleasures around. For instance, in the Collins anthropology transcription, Kant states, "A piece of music can be heard with pleasure by many hundreds of people." And there are similar quotations in many, many other anthropology transcriptions. But in the end, this is merely one more example of the unsteadiness of Kant's account of music. As Parrott notes, Kant's appraisal of the value of music is mutable, fragmented, and contradictory. Finally, and this last point too, I submit, is in large part an implication of Kant's fixation on Tafelmusik, there is the following bizarre remark buried within his much criticized ranking of the arts, in which music gets a very low rating, apparently even below the telling of jokes. Music and material for laughter are two kinds of play, by which in the end nothing is thought. It is not the judging of the harmonies of tones or sallies of wit with which their beauty serve only as the necessary vehicle, but the promotion of the business of life in the body, the affect which moves the intestines and the diaphragm. In a word, the feeling of health, das Gefühl der Gesundheit. By this point, as Kivy aptly observes, music has become no more than an aid to digestion, the sonic counterpoint of Tums for the tummy. All right, and then a fifth part called circumstantial ad hominem arguments, not always fallacious. A common form of argument covered in many discussions of informal fallacies is the argumentum ad hominem, the argument against the man. First discussed by Aristotle in his sophistical refutations, this fallacy occurs when, as Aristotle puts it, when persons direct their solutions against the man, not against his argument. Although the different forms of this particular fallacy have been described variously by commentators, the abusive and circumstantial subtypes are the most frequently emphasized ones, and the ones that are usually accorded the most importance in scholarly accounts of the ad hominem fallacy. Abusive ad hominem arguments, and this is by far the most common form of this fallacy, alleged fallacy, attack the person's character rather than his or her argument. For example, you shouldn't take Rick Perry's argument, he's a Texas politician, for decriminalizing the drug ibogaine seriously. His presidential campaign was a disaster, and he was a terrible governor. Perry's alleged missteps as governor and presidential candidate are not relevant to his claim that ibogaine can be a beneficial treatment for brain trauma, addiction, and perhaps cognitive decline. Look to the argument, not the man. Circumstantial ad hominem arguments, on the other hand, attack the person's circumstances, implying that these circumstances render the merits of the argument suspect. For example, of course you are urging the legislature to support Trump's new bill. It will financially benefit your company and advance your own economic interests. The alleged fact that a person's own economic situation will improve if Trump's bill passes is not relevant to the question of whether the legislature should support the bill. And the speaker may indeed have a sound argument in favor of the bill, one that is independent of his own financial circumstances. Several well-meaning friends have warned me that my remarks in the preceding sections of this paper simply amount to one long-winded circumstantial ad hominem argument against Kant. For I have argued that due to Kant's personal circumstances, his efforts toward a viable theory of music had to come up short. In order to produce a plausible theory of music, one needs a certain experience, familiarity, and interest in musical culture. And this is something that Kant lacked. However, in my view, circumstantial ad hominem arguments, and that's my specific concern here, are not always fallacious. Sometimes, as Walton notes, he's written I think it was a 400-page book on this one little fallacy, more than most of us want to hear about it. As Walton notes, it is sometimes legitimate to question another arguer's commitments. Consider the following example. And yes, this hypothetical case is constructed with Kant's own pronouncements about music in mind. By his own choice, he has rarely attended a concert, or he only did so when he was a young man and doing it as part of a social milieu. He never expressed serious interest in music. He's never studied any musical scores. But now he is writing a book on the philosophy of music. And because he's a well-known philosopher, he expects readers to take his views about music seriously. In this case, I submit that the person's circumstances are directly relevant to the claim he is making. This person's situation does not put him in a feasible epistemic location to write a good philosophy of music book. I will grant that it's logically possible that the resulting philosophy of music book could be a good book, just as it is mathematically possible, given an infinite amount of time, for monkeys typing randomly to eventually reproduce the works of Shakespeare. But there would still be something extremely odd about both the resulting philosophy of music book and the monkey-produced version of Shakespeare. Neither of them would be the result of intentional, conscious reflection and knowledge, but merely products of luck. So, sometimes circumstances matter, i.e., sometimes a person's circumstances are directly relevant to claims and arguments that he or she makes. And when the circumstances that one is in make it extremely unlikely that one can achieve an announced goal, to point this out is not a fallacy, but rather a matter of common sense. Conclusion. In an important footnote toward the end of his Prolegomena to any future metaphysics, where Kant explains what he means by the term transcendental, he writes, "High towers and metaphysically great men, around both of which there is usually much wind, are not for me. My place is the fertile bathos of experience." Alas, when it came to music, the sage of Königsberg forgot his place. Thank you. Ooh. Can
Thank you,
you hear
Professor
me? I
Louden.
can't. Oh, all right.
Yeah,
All right.
can. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for a challenging and richly textured lecture. So before opening the discussion, let me briefly take advantage of my position as a chair just for a moment. At the methodological level, I find your argument particularly persuasive, especially your defense of circumstantial ad hominem critique. You show very clearly that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You show that very clearly that in certain cases, an author experiential position is not an irrelevant biographical detail, but a genuine epistemic condition for what they're attempting to do. But turning more on directly to Kant, your lecture offers a clear diagnosis. The instability of his remark on music reflect on a significant extent his limited familiarity with the musical practice and culture. My question is whether at very least part of this instability might also be explained from within Kant's own aesthetic framework, especially by the difficulty of accommodating a temporal non-conceptual art like music within a theory of taste, grounded in reflective judgment and communicability. In this sense, could music function not merely as a biographical blind spot, but as a structural stress test for Kant's aesthetic itself? So with that, I'm happy to open the floor to question and to give the floor to Professor Louden and other wants to ask something.
Okay. Thank you very much, Federico. Yeah, why don't we just have discussion now? Again, I don't want to sound too mushy here, but this is a newish area for me, and I don't want to come off as too dogmatic in what I've been saying. But it is something I've thought about a bit, and yeah, it is my considered position at present.
Okay, so maybe Professor Zuller want to ask a question.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Robert, for this provocative presentation. I changed my virtual background over your talk.
Yeah, I see a Schoenberg quote there.
It had been a more amicable portrayal of my three musical heroes, Beethoven, Wagner, and Schoenberg. And I changed it now to a quote by Schoenberg about
I've got
the
one in
relation
a footnote here too. I'm looking for it, but give me yours first.
Well, if it's art, it's not for all. If it's not for all, it's not. If it's for all, it's not art. So I needed a provocative counter quote to your naturalizing, democratizing, psychologizing interpretation of Kant on the music here. I would like to make three remarks in response to your paper. One is about Kant's, to call it with Adorno, who was using the term in regard to Wagner, social character. We should not forget Kant's humble background and his improbable career path as the son of a local Handwerker in Königsberg, and someone who only with great difficulty and financial sacrifice on his parents and on his own part, was able to make it into academia, and eventually, after a long time, decades, to a professorship that he acquired and reached, was awarded in 1770. So this is not the career of someone with an education that included musical training, exposure to the arts, and he did not later on then choose to devote time and energy on acquiring that education on his own, and instead chose to lead a fairly, as the Greeks would say, banausic life, a life of an artisan that would not be very much involved with the arts. The second point is the contemporary situation, that Kant is not the only one who at the time does not have a theoretical appreciation of the value of music, not as an art, mind you, but as a fine art, as an art that really compares to painting, sculpture, architecture, in contemporary terms. That's a process that takes place around 1800, and Kant's own preparation is very much in the middle of the 18th century and doesn't reflect these developments that come in only in the 90s of the 18th century and around 1800. And the third point would be, given your recourse to the ad hominem argument, one could subsume all your presentation this morning on the genetic fallacy, that you sidestep genuinely philosophical issues by going into the genetic circumstances of the views Kant held or didn't hold, and you miss the chance of going to the one crucial thing, that Kant provides a problem that in later theory is then worked out and drives the development both of the theory of music and the practice of music, toward absolute music, toward instrumental music in its own terms, and all of those things. The challenge is, in the critique of pure reason, to account for the intersubjective validity of musical aesthetic judgments in a situation where they are either reduced to feelings and to the agreeable, or that are not even taken seriously beyond a mere physiological response. And that challenge, the transcendental challenge, need not be adequately satisfied by Kant himself, but he manages to pose it the way that he also posed it in the other arts, and he posed it in his moral philosophy and his theoretical philosophy. So in that regard, I would say you commit this genetic fallacy. Thanks very much.
Well, as usual, you've got a lot of things packed into those remarks. I have a little quote from Schoenberg too that's in a footnote. Let me start with that. It's very different from yours. Schoenberg writes, "My personal feeling is that music conveys a prophetic message revealing a higher form of life toward which mankind evolves." It's similar to that remark by Attali that I was in the body of my paper. I'm not sure that I disagree with the Schoenberg quote on the wall behind you there. I don't think all art, all forms or kinds of art that need to be for all people. Some art maybe, but certainly not all of it. There's a place for a more, if you will, refined or elite art that some of us just won't be able to appreciate. That seems pretty obvious to me. You know, this might seem a little bullheaded to you, but I think the point I want to emphasize here is simply that my argument again is that if one wants to responsibly theorize and philosophize about music, one needs to be interested in music. One needs to have some familiarity with it. One needs to think about music a lot. And it's just not at all clear that Kant did that. Okay. this is not a highfalutin fancy argument. I realize some of you might think there's something missing, but I think the point is sound.
Okay. Maybe there is another question from, I cannot read the name, but
Yeah,
it's
no, that's right.
GMG.
Yes, yeah, Jared. Thanks so much, Robert, for that talk. Really enjoyed it. So I'm wondering if you could phrase, I think I'm in general agreement, but I'm wondering somewhat in defense of Kant. And I'll make this question in form of an analogy. It seems like for Kant, you could have two friends who go to a museum and judge oppositely of a work of art. And this one of them judges that it's beautiful, the other not. And I take it that on Kant's account, we would expect them both, assuming they're both good Kantians, we would expect them both to take the opposing judgment as a challenge. So there seems to be something empirical going on in how we approach the aesthetic experience of the work of art. And I take it your point, we could be saying the same about Kant, that Kant, the person, just is not coming to music with the appropriate education and standpoint to have the right aesthetic experience. But presumably, we could make the argument to him that here's the formal aspect of music whereby it could be beautiful art.
I'm sorry, if I may I want to interject something here, and it relates a little bit to at least some of what my friend Gunter was saying a minute ago. Yeah, I mean, Kant did not come from a refined family, and there wasn't much exposure to the arts. But, and the but's important, it was Kant's own choice not to get serious about music. There are great musicians and composers and theorists of music who also come from working class background, but they said, hey, there's something about music that grips me. I want to get more serious about music and understand it. Kant made the choice not to do that. If he didn't have any choice about it, and you know, we don't choose our parents, we don't choose our class background, et cetera, et cetera. Agreed. But in a case where one has a choice not to get serious about something, then he wants to talk about it and yap about it, that's a problem, okay? And that's part of my argument.
Yeah, so I guess then my question is, couldn't we agree with you and say, well, look, we ought to challenge Kant on Kantian grounds and say, you're not approaching music with the right empirical formation, and that's a failure. That's a personal failure. But the challenge there would be coming from within his system, very much like the two friends who disagree about the work in front of them, and then through discussion, hopefully the other, one or the other, comes to recognize that they were misperceiving what was actually the formal element whereby it could have been judged in some cases as beautiful art. Would that be fair on your account, where we're still saying, in other words, it wouldn't be a ad hominem. It would be saying from Kantian grounds, well, look, he's just not approaching it with the right empirical formation to be able to appreciate it from the right standpoint. But that would require us to make the case to him precisely on Kantian grounds.
Yeah.
Would that be fair on your view?
I like that. I do like that very much. But one problem, of course, is what we consider Kantian grounds to be.
Right. Right.
As some of you probably know, I've spent a large part of my philosophical career emphasizing the empirical side of Kant's philosophy, what I call the impure side. And yeah, I suppose I didn't really think about it this way when I started writing, but I suppose this is another example of that plea that I keep making. Music has a pretty substantial impure dimension to it. And if one's going to talk seriously about music, one needs to gear into that impure dimension and not just ask what are the transcendental preconditions of music or something. You can't get too far if you take the latter route. So yeah, I'll take that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, so Professor Guy,
Me.
do you have a question? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So thanks for this talk. I've also been thinking about Kant and music in recent months. So I want to ask, I guess, a very short question. If what you say is right, doesn't that apply to Kant's aesthetics generally? I mean, Kant wasn't an expert on, as far as I know, and I haven't done the thorough research you've done, but I don't think Kant was an expert on painting or sculpture or on the experience of artistic genius. So now, and I say this I say this taking your argument fully seriously. It is mysterious how someone who basically read all his life could say things of profundity about aesthetics, where the experiential aspect, the impure aspect, is so important. But I mean, it is a mystery. But I think we accept that he did say very deep things about domains in which experience is central.
Well, yes, I do think you're right that my argument may have wider implications, and it may not just
perhaps
God's remarks about music that are in trouble. One of the quotes I cited talked about this a little bit. He didn't really know much about painting. I do think poetry is an important exception. I would say Kant had serious interests in poetry, so I would separate that. But there may be, what did he know about ballet? Nice.
Yes, Robert.
Yes, I have a simple question too on this. Why, so taking your argument seriously as well, although I think many good points have been made in response to your paper, why don't you think that his exposure as a young man was sufficient to then theorize later? As we know, and as you quoted, he was very active and also going to the theater. And things like that.
Well,
and as you know, when you get older, it's not easy to get out and go to the show and the performance.
Easy there. Some of us are still doing what we can.
Yeah, but anyway, why was that not sufficient?
Well, yeah, and you talked about this a little bit in an earlier email that you sent me. Yes, Kant did attend concerts, but primarily when he was a younger person. And even here, I'm somewhat critical. I would say he was attending concerts as a kind of a sort of a social, his rich friends, and hey, we're going to a concert. Why don't you tag along? And he said, oh, okay. But I don't think he or his rich friends were really paying that much attention to the music that was being played. It's a night at the opera. The way most people go to these concerts, they're looking at what each other's wearing, and they're not really that seriously focused about.
I guess my question was what how far can we get by reading theory? Because I think Kant read a lot of theory. I think I can show that he read music. I mean, he read texts on musical theory, and I can definitely show that he read texts on the physics of tones and harmony on harmony. I mean, he taught these things. These were in his physics lecture. So he knew a lot of theory. And if we can show that he read some music theory, the question becomes, how far can we get by relying on theory, even accepting that perhaps he had no deep personal experience of music. And I think that's a deep question. I don't mean to dismiss. I mean, I think it's an open question, but it is a question, yes, and not a foregone conclusion.
I certainly do not want to be read as an anti-theorist. One of my earlier books was actually an attack on anti-theory, but there can be too much of a good thing. I think to theorize about music, to philosophize about music, I think it would be certainly a good idea to look at what earlier theorists and philosophers of music had said. But again, I'm sorry to keep coming back to this, but this is what my paper was about. If you want to theorize seriously about music, you've got to be interested in music. You've got to think about it and reflect on it. You've got to listen to it. And it's not clear that Kant really did that.
What about biology?
Biology.
Do you need to be deeply invested in biological practice in order to theorize about biology? Because people argue that Kant's biological notion of race is extremely consequential.
Yeah.
So, but he wasn't deeply engaged in actual biological practice.
Well, if I may,
he was Kant.
It wasn't reading biology.
He is a mystery. It's not that I deny that, how Kant could have said all the, deep things he said is a mystery. But I think we accept he said
here too, if I may, I think a little more empirical experience with other peoples would have helped Kant in his disgusting remarks about race. I mean, who was the fellow in Halle who was from Africa and wrote a dissertation in Latin and taught there for a while? There's a statue of him that I've looked at in Halle, but now in my senile old age, I can't remember the guy's name at the moment. But
I mean the theoretical aspects of trying to make progress on the theoretical notion of race, not the racist remarks.
Well, I mean, here too, I would say,
yeah, okay. I think I've outstayed my welcome.
So Professor Paul Schulmeier want to ask something. So,
thank you. Thanks for your paper, Bert. I have a rather simple question too. I like simple questions. My question may also be a rather naive question because I'm not a specialist on Kant, not a specialist in aesthetics, especially the aesthetics of music, which is why I'm here, of course. But I think you made a good case to suggest that Kant's experience of music was limited, like we can put it that way, and probably not sufficient to write a deep analysis of music. But that leaves the question, well, what about Kant's third critique? What are the implications for our understanding of music? Isn't some music fall into the category of beautiful? And surely some falls into the category of sublime. And so I wonder if you've given any thought to the implications of the third critique for a theory of music, even though Kant didn't work it out as satisfactorily as he might have.
Yeah, Paul and I were colleagues in graduate school about 50 years ago. If all goes as planned, we're going to meet each other for lunch in Las Vegas tomorrow. We co-edited a book together many years ago called The Greeks and Us. I'm not sure I can do justice to your question, but yes, the concepts of the beautiful and the sublime both apply to music. I think that's definitely the case. Although in Kant's remarks about music, he does not, if I recall, well, there's a little bit about the beauty in music, but he doesn't talk about sublimity in music. I think if he had listened to more good music, say some Haydn or Mozart, then he might have talked more about sublimity in music, but he didn't.
Professor Ziller?
Uh-oh, here we go again.
Thank you. We have so far talked about music as fine art, but before music was a fine art, it was a liberal art.
Mhm.
One of the artes liberales in the medieval canon that
Yeah.
was taught very much through early modern times. And there, music is not so much an auditory experience, but an intellectual exercise akin to and also in proximity to arithmetic and geometry. It has to do with numerical relations that also captured in Leibniz saying about music being unconscious mathematics. And I think that that dimension is much closer to Kant, maybe even in knowledge, or at least in his understanding of the context into which, in a traditional regard, music, in a philosophical regard, music belongs. How serious would you take that?
Well, your opening remarks about music being treated as a liberal art rather than as a fine art in Kant's day, those remarks are well taken. Although here I'm a little puzzled. I probably don't know the whole story. I mean, how much, if any, education about music did Kant himself experience when he was a student? I haven't heard anything about that. So I'm not sure it's at all the case that all students, even in good schools like the ones Kant attended, learned much about music in Kant's day, despite these official pronouncements about music as one of the traditional liberal arts. I think it was really more a matter of one's personal circumstances that either led one to gain exposure to music or to miss out on that. And again, my point is that Kant missed out on that. And it wasn't necessary that he did. It just has to do with the choices he made in his life about what to focus on. I mean, I had a couple quotes in there from his biographers where one of them even said, Kant told me to quit studying music because it would just take me away from science. And he's right. If you want to be a good musician, you've got to practice an awful lot. And you're not going to have time for too much else. And I speak a little bit from personal experience here. I've always been interested in music, but I basically quit when I was an adolescent because I just wasn't disciplined enough to keep on practicing. And I started getting interested in other things like philosophy. And now I regret it a little bit. In my retirement, I'm trying to improve on my modest violin skills. But it's harder when you're older. You're not as flexible with your fingers and so forth.
Other questions? No other questions? Maybe can I ask a question just for so you suggested that Kant is not really aiming at the theory of music in strong sense, and I completely right. I couldn't say better, but do you think it is fairer to read his remarks as a deliberately limited transcendental placement of music within his theory of taste if he is not really aiming at a theory of music, rather than a failed attempt at music theory because he's not really aiming at a theory of music? So why consider his remarks on music as a theory of music?
Well, all right, good question. Agreed. And I think most people who've written about Kant's views on music agree with this point. Kant does not offer a fully developed, exhaustive theory of music. He offers
a theory of music
remarks,
or
somewhat
arts.
scattered
Yeah,
remarks.
sure. Yeah.
I think I agree with that. But then tell me again now, what's the problem with that?
So if Kant is not really developing a theory of music in strong sense, do you think it's fairer to read these remarks as a deliberate, limited, transcendental placement of music within his theory of music instead of an attempt to develop a theory of music, an attempt that later failed?
I'm not sure if I know what to do with that part of your comments.
Because
I agree that, granted, he doesn't set out to offer a fully developed theory of music. That's not his goal. But
because considering
even the remarks that he does make about music,
yes,
I'm arguing, they're inconsistent, they're even contradictory, and at points they reveal just here I'm thinking of this remark about the diaphragm and so forth. At points they just indicate a misunderstanding of what music is.
And why
that could have been alleviated had he been more interested in the culture of music.
Yes, but why don't treat his remarks on music not as a theory of music, but as a reflection on the various type
reflection of the
on the variety of types of musics, and not just as a theory of classical music or of a serious music? Because, for example, he says that music, choir music, may even present the sublime in paragraph 21 or 51 or 52. And so it seems to me that that Kant has a variety of types of music in mind, and sure, is not acquaintance with music, is not. So I agree with you that he is not aiming at a theory of arts or of music, and is not stronger. Is not a lover of music. It's not a music lover. But why don't read this not as a complete theory, as a failed coherent theory, but just a reflections on various type of arts and various types of what music can express.
Well, okay, sure, we can do that, and perhaps that's all we can do, given again that he doesn't offer a full-fledged theory of music. But when you look at these remarks, they just don't add up. Sometimes they're just flat out contradictory, and at other points they indicate a misunderstanding of what music is. And these errors, or so I have argued, could have been alleviated had Kant been more genuinely concerned about music than he was.
Yes. Professor Zilder?
If I may intervene there, you could try to allocate the third critique remarks to a transcendental core, and then disregard or treat separately the anthropological remarks on music and music experience, so that you follow the line that is being suggested here, that there is indeed a focus on music from a transcendental perspective in the third critique, with an ambitious philosophical goal, but a non-ambitious, even non-existing goal in the philosophy of music. Kant isn't giving a philosophy of music, just as he isn't giving a philosophy of painting. He is answering certain questions in his transcendental mode, akin to the first critique, synthetic conditions a priori. And in that regard, he makes some very illuminating remarks about the extent of formality that alone would guarantee intersubjective validity to musical judgments. And take that to be the point of the initiative here, that we distinguish between the anthropological material that you focus on and the transcendental traces, at least, in the third critique. And we see also that they have a different origin and they have a different destination. They will function in different contexts later in Kant and after Kant.
Well, as you probably suspect, I don't want to isolate the anthropological dimension from the transcendental dimension. We haven't heard any non-human music as of yet. If and when we get some close contact or close encounters, perhaps we will be treated to some extraterrestrial music. But right now, as far as we know, it's a human phenomenon. And if you're going to think and talk responsibly about it, you've got to know something about the humans who are creating it. But I don't want to sound overly dogmatic. Sure, certainly, Kant is a transcendental philosophy, and certainly he is trying to approach music more from a transcendental perspective in the third critique. But even when he does that, it's inevitable that he's talking about what happens to human beings when they listen to music. Are they getting indigestion? And he's not serious and well informed when he's doing this. And I think it adversely affects even his attempts to talk about transcendental aspects of what music is.
Great. So if there are no other questions, Robert, if you want to say something to conclude our session.
I think there's one more question.
Well, thanks for putting up with me. I know this is not. I'm coming at Kant's remarks about music, yes, more from my obsession with Kant's anthropology. This is not a traditional piece in musical aesthetics. That's what I think we can all agree on. But no, thank you very much for hearing me out, and I've enjoyed the opportunity to speak with you on this topic.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very interesting and challenging talks. And Robert Clewis, if you want to say something, Robert.
Yes, I just want to thank you for moderating, Federico. Thank you, Bert,
you
Professor
much.
Louden, for the interesting paper, provocative paper, which led to and provoked, I think, a very interesting discussion. And I think we saw a lot about the different angles that you could take to this question. So I genuinely thank you. Meanwhile, I want to wish all of you a happy new year. And happy holidays and great start to 2026. And
Go listen to some music over the holidays too, not just Tafel music.